Loud.
Okay. Let me say, got it. Okay.
All right. Book again.
So, well, this week we're going to continue discussion of looking in Scripture for examples of people in wilderness. And last week we described a wilderness moment as essentially a time in your life when you feel helpless. Barbara Brown Taylor says wilderness moments can come in all sorts of shapes and sizes and in different times and places, but essentially you know you're in one when you look around for the normal things you depend upon to save your life and they aren't there. In other words, the normal things you depend upon to keep you going day to day aren't working anymore.
I'm never mad at it.
And so last week we talked about the Israelites in the wilderness for 40 years. And this week we're going to talk about the prophet Elijah, who has kind of some amazing stories, but illustrates, I think, dealing with burnout and depression, and also explains what the concept of solitude means. And solitude is that we're going to get into, but I have a couple questions for you to think about. And if you feel comfortable sharing in a moment, I'd love to have you share. Gene Beatty and Margot Kramer and Maria Oppenheimer shared last week, and what they had to share was so meaningful. And so the first question is, was there ever a time in your life when you felt burnt out or depressed that you would be willing to share about? And then a second question is, was there ever a time in your life where you benefited from going off and being by yourself and being alone, and that was helpful to you spiritually? And so was there ever a time in your life where you felt burnout or depressed? And was there ever a time in your life where you benefited or felt renewed by being by yourself? And that brings up the concept of solitude, which is different from loneliness. I don't know if you remember the first Superman movie came out in like 1980, 1979, somewhere. Christopher Reeve was Superman. He went off up near the North Pole, and he established his fortress of solitude, which was his place to go be alone. And that was where he retreated to be by himself when he needed to be. And sometimes he felt renewed by being there, and sometimes he felt lonely by being there. But I want to draw a distinction between loneliness and solitude. The theologian Paul Tillich said it this way. He said, loneliness expresses the pain of being alone, and solitude expresses the glory of being alone. So there's a difference in the kind of aloneness you experience. Solitude isn't loneliness. It's when you need to be by yourself or create space for yourself, for renewal, for spiritual growth, for recovery from what we struggle with. And our culture doesn't do a very good job of allowing us solitude, of alone moments that help us to recover and renew. And the number one reason I have trouble with it is my phone. Now that I can watch TV and read the news and talk to people and text and be on social media, I find it really hard to set down my phone. Um, I can remember when it was hard to turn off the TV. Now it's harder to set down my phone, I feel like. But there can be a rejuvenating part of being alone. And here's another definition. Parker Palmer is a writer who's meant a lot to me. And he says, solitude does not necessarily mean living apart from others. Rather, it means never living apart from oneself. In other words, solitude doesn't mean you always have to go live in a cave like a hermit somewhere. You can experience solitude in the midst of community. But what you're always doing, and in solitude rather than loneliness, is connecting with yourself, of giving yourself enough space and time, and doing things that are meaningful to you, that allow you to connect with who you really are. And it's so easy for us to forget who we really are. We wear a lot of masks, we put on a lot of fronts, and I think our technology allows us to do that. As far as I can tell, being on Facebook and Instagram, everybody's trying to do their best to present their family as the most perfect family in the entire world. They never put up the bad pictures where the kids aren't looking or causing trouble. It's always the pictures where everybody looks great and is staring at the camera and nobody has their eyes closed. And so solitude allows us to really connect with who we are rather than who we're trying to be to impress other people. All right, I'd like to pause for a moment and say, does anybody feel brave enough to maybe share a time in your life where you were burnt out or feeling depressed along your journey?
A lot of times.
Or maybe, okay, was that Maria?
Yes.
Yeah, you're so brave. What were you going to share?
Well, I've been burned out lots of times, but they're too private to share. But I always feel that people who constantly have their phones with them, or the radio in their house, or the TV on, they never have time to really reflect on their lives and see what's really going on. They kind of try to shut it off, or like just go over it and try not to go into it. They're afraid of themselves. I think so.
I think you're wise. All of the distractions we experience, I know when I feel anxious and afraid, I don't want to sit with my feelings. I want a distraction so I don't have to think. Or even if I'm sad, I don't want to think about it. I want to be distracted. And we miss out on some of the most important things in life that way.
Yes. And then you never get over it. But if you really get into it.
Right. How are you going to ever get over your anxiety or fear if you never face it? Right.
Exactly.
Anybody else have an experience in their life where they felt burnout or depressed they feel like they can share about?
Chase, it's Roger Hill. I remember I'll call it a little dark time where I had lost a job. I had a wife, 2 young kids in school. I could call it like a temporary job with another company, but I knew it wasn't right. And so in those dark moments, you're feeling, okay, what's the meaning of life? Am I meant to be in this position? I've got these kids I got to support. Unlike today, where people seem to just quit and then take 3 months off and then go about doing what they want to do. You have the old stigmas. Everyone in this that I can see on this call in the age group knows if you're the breadwinner, there's a certain responsibility with that. And it was a tough time because I had to figure out, okay, where am I going to go? And fortunately, it turned out very well, but it was a time where there wasn't a lot of places I could turn to. In a sense, I didn't have that support group, shall we say. I wasn't involved with the church, and it was a time of, I would say, like being alone with the fear, alone with the unknown of what was going to happen. And fortunately, it didn't last long.
Boy, you've hit on it. And job loss is such a big identity hit, you know, and I'm not sure if it's changing for generations, but I know for my generation and older, especially men, you know, you incorporate a lot of messages growing up that your self-worth is based on what you do, you know, for a living and providing for your family. And yeah, that can be a really lonely time, and just the security of having a paycheck, and then when you don't have one, that's frightening. You know, so thank you. Can anybody share, think of a time where you went maybe somewhere or made time in your life to be alone, and that alone time helped you maybe face your fears or renew yourself spiritually, or that kind of thing?
Chase,
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Early in my first marriage, I was in seminary, and we had an efficiency apartment. It had a living room, a little walk-through area where the kitchen was, a bedroom and a bathroom. And my brother, who was at that time was probably 13 or 14, came up from Mississippi and lived in our living room for a summer. So there were three of us in that small space, and when we put Paul on the bus, we drove up to Conception Seminary, which is out from as you know, out from St. Joseph, and we made a rule that we could talk to each other if we wanted to, but if either of us did not want to talk, they got the vote. You know, they made the decision that we would be in silence. And so we spent a weekend with those kinds of rule, with that kind of rule, where and that was very, I remember that it came to mind immediately. That's a very small kind of thing, but it was a very restorative time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think I heard somebody else start to speak.
So it was just when I had made the decision that I was going to get divorced, and it was a very, very difficult decision because I just, you know, of course it was a difficult decision. And I was living in Portland, Oregon at the time, and I went on this mountain, and I was by myself, and I brought at that point a tape recorder, you know, one of those cassette machines, and I had some music, and I was playing this music, and it was just being in nature and feeling God's presence and feeling I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay.
Yeah, that's a great examples. So, well, our biblical story today, and thank you all for sharing. From my end of things, your stories are the best part. So thank you. The story from scripture we're looking at today is about the prophet Elijah. And he hits a burnout or a depressive moment. I kind of think like unlike any in scripture, he exhibits some of the telltale signs of depression when he, clinical depression, when he hits his difficult time. But what's interesting in the scripture is his wilderness moment comes after these incredible achievements in his life and these incredible spiritual moments where God answers prayers and performs miracles and does this amazing stuff. And then after all this great stuff, he goes into this deep funk. And to me, it's illustrative that sometimes wilderness moments don't come when we experience a loss or a grief. sometimes they come strangely after we reach an achievement in life, and perhaps those achievements are not as fulfilling as we hoped they would be or thought they would be. Or maybe they aren't enough to fulfill us spiritually and keep us going through our difficult times. Let me review these Bible stories to give you an idea of all the good stuff that happens to Elijah before he hits his wilderness moment. Elijah's this prophet who shows up out of the blue in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, and he warns the king that there's going to be a drought because the king has begun worshiping foreign gods and breaking the covenant with God, and he gets in trouble. And so the word of the Lord, which is a phrase used with the prophets, or we might say the Spirit, directs him to go run and hide out in a creek, a wadi, at the bottom of a canyon in the desert. And there he is miraculously fed by ravens who bring him meat and bread twice a day, and he has water to drink. And so for days, these ravens show up and feed him miraculously. And then when the water dries up, the word of the Lord comes again and says, go to Lebanon, where modern day Lebanon is. And he goes to this small town, and he sees a woman who's a widow going to the well. And he says, would you get me some water? And, oh, by the way, would you get me some bread too? And she says, I only have enough flour and oil to make one last meal because there's a drought and we have no food. And I'm going to eat it with my son, and then we're going to lay down and die. Mm. And then Elijah says, no, you won't. God is going to provide for you, and there's going to be enough bread, flour and oil to make bread every day until there's food in the land again. And so God provides. And this little bit of oil and this little bit of flour never runs out until the drought is over. But then after this miracle, the son of this widow dies, or appears to die.
This is my girlfriend.
And so she says, what are you doing to me? You've helped me to survive only for my son to die. And Elijah prays, and God brings this youth back to life. And so everything's looking great for Elijah. And he goes and he confronts the king again. And he says, bring all your prophets of these foreign gods up to the top of this mountain, and we're going to have a showdown. And so these prophets of the Canaanite god Baal, he tells them, make a sacrifice on this altar and pray to your God to burn it and catch it on fire. And so the prophets do, and nothing happens. And then he takes his sacrifice and puts it on an altar, and they douse it with water twice. And he had them dig a trench around the altar, and there's so much water on it, it fills the trench. But then fire from heaven comes down and consumes all the water and the sacrifice. And all the people believe in Israel's God again. And then miraculously Elijah prays, and the drought ends and rain comes. And so Elijah has all these dramatic things happen where God answers prayers, and a major spiritual showdown against his enemies. God provides for him miraculously, where he doesn't die and has enough to survive. But then the king and his wife, who worships foreign gods, say they're going to kill Elijah. And suddenly he runs for his life and he begins saying, I just want to die. And I'm the only one who's righteous anymore. Everyone's evil. And he runs off into the desert and says, I want to die. And he sleeps all the time, which is a symptom of depression. He won't eat, a symptom of depression. He's suicidal, a symptom of depression. He feels like he's all alone, another symptom of depression. And it's ironic that after all these great things happen, he faces another obstacle, another problem. And instead of saying, God's going to take care of me, God has just performed a bunch of miracles, I know it's all going to be okay, he runs for his life and runs off into the desert and wants to die. And so let me pause there and ask, does that make sense to any of you? Or why do you think Elijah lost faith and seemed to want to give up after all these great and miraculous things happen? Anybody? Because it's a bit of a mystery to me. And I'm wondering if anybody else has any idea why or might identify with that story. And there's no
Hi,
right
Chase.
or wrong answer. Hey, Marie.
Hi, Chase. I'm not really sure what the biblical story, how it continues, but you know, sometimes you get tired of fighting, even though
Yeah.
the results eventually come your way. And then, you know, you go over the mountain and you see another mountain, you know, it's like, okay, I've had enough here. I need to rest.
Yeah. Oh, I love that idea. I love that idea, Marie, because, you know, when we experience conflict in our families, you know, with our children, you know, I've dealt with numerous families and had my own experiences where you know, are dealing with someone who has mental health problems, or you have conflict with somebody at work, you know, or somewhere else in your life. Like Maureen said, even if it turns out okay, you're drained from it. And you don't have the reserves necessary to keep going. You know, that's a really, like you said, you get over the mountain and you see another mountain. Maureen, that's a really good answer. I like that one. Anybody else have any ideas?
Well, I would think another take might be too, to capitalize on that statement is, if you're Elijah, that son dies, the mother comes after you, bites you where it hurts and says, what's the point of all this? He, you know, is resurrected, but then he goes through all this other stuff and everybody still turns against him. He said, he can be saying, is there anybody worth saving? What's the point? What's the point of being here? Or what's my purpose if every time something goes wrong, God has to step in? What good am I?
Right.
And if there's nobody good left, I might as well just lie down and die and just get it over with.
Ooh, I like that answer too. Yeah.
That would be my interpretation. What's it all about? Why was I given this to do, and then I'll walk. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And what good is it if nothing ever changes and I keep having the same difficulties? Right. Well, there's some interesting things.
Could have just been exhausted.
Yeah.
It could have been, you know, I think physical exhaustion too also contributes to downers, really, you know. And sometimes I think, oh, you just need to go to bed. You know, you just need to, you know, I don't need the thing. I'm thinking this way, and I think this way when I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
You know?
That's good too, Ken. And, self-care has become a bit of a buzzword in our culture right now, but it really is real, and shouldn't trivialize it. And I think many of us were raised with ideas that if we slow down and take care of ourselves, that means we're lazy, or somehow that's being selfish if we stop and take care of ourselves. And instead, we need to rest, and we are exhausted. Thank you, Ken. So, well, there's some interesting parallels in this story, and we're going to see this again and again with the stories of wilderness that we're going to look at in this study. In this story, Elijah travels for 40 days and 40 nights, which is reminiscent of the 40 years the Israelites were in the wilderness, the 40 days and 40 nights Jesus is tempted in the wilderness, and so on. And along the way, he's exhausted and tired, and twice an angel of the Lord shows up to feed him and says, you need to be fed for this journey. So like the Israelites who had the manna we talked about last week, Elijah is fed along the way, miraculously. And then, like the Israelites, he complains and says, I wish I was dead, like they did. And he ends up going back to Mount Sinai. The text in 1 Kings says Mount Horeb, which is another name for Mount Sinai, which is on the Sinai Peninsula between Egypt and modern day Israel. And there he has an experience of God. And he is there and hears God speaking to him. And he says, I'm the last one. I'm alone. I'm the only one that's still righteous, and they want to kill me. There's no point anymore. And so God says, step outside of the cave you're in, because I'm going to come to you. And then this miraculous, strange thing occurs where there's first a strong wind that comes and blows. And the text says God was not in the strong wind. And then an earthquake happens and shakes the mountain. And the text says, but God was not in the earthquake. And then fire comes. And it says God was not in the fire. And then it has this peculiar phrase in Hebrew, which literally means the sound of silence. And in the old King James Version, the traditional reading of this was a still small voice. But it literally meant the sound of no sound. And God speaks to Elijah again and says, why are you here? And Elijah says the same thing again. I'm alone. Everybody wants to kill me. There's no point. I'm the only one righteous. I want to die. So he has all this miraculous stuff happen, and it's not enough. He seems unchanged by it. And this is another parallel with the Israelites that we talked about last week when they were in the wilderness. They've experienced all these miracles and keep experiencing miracles, but miracles don't seem to lead to trusting in God, which seems oxymoronic or paradoxical. I don't know the right word to say that we always want miracles or signs, But in the biblical text, often the miracles and signs don't result in people having any more faith or trust in God. And part of it might be his depression or exhaustion, that nothing might shake him out of it. And I want to be conscious of the time. We got time. Back in my time at the Congregational Church of Manhasset, I shared publicly in a sermon for the first time about my experience with clinical depression, which happened in my early 20s. And I have accepted that I'm just going to be on antidepressants my whole life, because whenever I've gone off of them, it returns. But and an interesting thing happened that Sunday. I won't name any names, but that particular Sunday, gosh, you know, this is 16, 17 years ago now. Can't believe it's been that long. There was a man in the church who was a member, but had never attended in my time there. And he had come back to church that Sunday. And he came up to me after the sermon and he said, everything you describe about your depression is exactly how I feel. I came to church today because I feel like I just want to die. And we talked about it. And I explained, well, it sounds to me like you're depressed and you need to see somebody about it. And I'm glad to say there was a happy ending to the story, in that he did go get help and followed up with him and got therapy and got some medication and was able to deal with his depression. Unfortunately, he never really came back to church again, but he at least got the help on that Sunday. You know, I think the Spirit was in him coming to church that Sunday. And I'll also share that the very first time, you know, I had to deal with my insurance to try to pay for a therapist. I can remember I had to meet with somebody from the insurance company. I guess they were concerned to make sure if they were going to pay for it, that I really needed it. And the woman I met with was totally dismissive. I mean, condescending, talking down to me to the point of rudeness about me describing my symptoms of depression. And I remember thinking, okay, I want this meeting over with. Please just approve my insurance for this and let me go. And she followed up with me like a month later, and she said, I need to apologize to you. She said, I was rude to you in that session because I was dealing with my own depression and I didn't want to get help. And so I was dismissing you when really I was dealing with my own problems. And after our conversation, I realized I needed to go find a therapist and a psychiatrist to help me. And so one of the things I want to make sure that I state clearly as we talk about these wilderness moments is sometimes they're not only a spiritual problem that we face, sometimes it's a neurological, you know, and biochemical problem as well. Sometimes it's stuff we've got to work out in our therapy. And sometimes we're in a state physiologically and neurologically that we cannot receive the spiritual messages God is sending us because we are in a mental health state where we are unable to. And I believe that God works through medication, through therapists, through counselors, through all those things. And so I want to state clearly as we talk about Elijah's situation and talk about the spiritual dimensions of his issues, I don't want to dismiss that as we know a lot more about mental health and medical health than they knew about 3,000 years ago. And so I want to make sure it's stated that I'm not a person that thinks you can pray away your clinical depression. I think prayer helps and is a tool, but sometimes an answered prayer comes in the form of a good antidepressant and a good counselor. So to the, before I pivot to Elijah's spiritual issues and what I think he needed, that God helped him to focus on. Does anyone want to respond just to me sharing a bit about my experience with clinical depression and mental health? If anybody feels comfortable sharing about their own struggle or experience, it can be helpful to hear from other people.
Well, Chase, just a comment. It's interesting. Your dive into the wilderness actually helped bring two people out of their wilderness.
That's right.
It's an interesting story because, again, you by opening up, two other people were able to face their issues, which is interesting. Elijah didn't know what effect he had on others in this story, but your story actually brought two people out, which is commendable.
Well, and all it took was being vulnerable, right? And as a minister, I'm in a role maybe to do that maybe other people don't feel like they can, but there's a reason we go to support groups, right? Is to find other people who are struggling with what we struggle. My wife and I have benefited greatly from some, parent support groups. It was just good to hear from other people to know we weren't the only ones, because we were struggling with stuff where we felt like we were failures. There's a reason people need AA groups and recovery groups, is because hearing other people's stories and knowing you're not alone and learning from other people is healing. And it's a shame that especially when it comes to mental health, there's such a veil of secrecy. And I will say this, not to disparage the North Shore of Long Island, but Jimmy and I know, and Maureen might know this too from her experience in ministry. I've kind of never been lived anywhere where there were more people hiding. I mean, I know everyone has pain, but the North Shore of Long Island, because of the money and the wealth and the, and all that, it just seemed to feed itself into this cycle of people hiding all their pain. And, Jimmy can tell you after his 25 years there of, without naming names, the sheer number of people he's counseled in his office who were facing dramatic life struggles and pain, mental health, addiction, job loss, major crises, divorce, everything. And you would have no idea, because the life they presented, on Plandome Road or at the yacht club or the country club, gave no clue whatsoever, and so the gift of vulnerability, of people sharing their pain, it takes real courage, and but it changes lives, because it opens the floodgates of people sharing. Does anybody else want to share maybe an experience?
When Jim was ill, I was helped so much by the Long Island Alzheimer's group. And we had a group that shared Black humor. We could cry, we could laugh. It was amazing what it does for you to be able to share with other people your pain and your funny moments at the same time. It makes a huge difference.
Chase,
Yeah.
I was brought up to be self-sufficient, and I was brought up to keep what was going on in my life and in my home quiet, don't share. So since I've grown up since then, I just am so appreciative of everybody who could help. and everybody who did help me. And I was surprised when I realized how terribly anxious I was. And I did speak to my doctor about it, and I got some medication for the anxiety. And I'm privileged to be with a couple of support groups and a lot of people who are helping. And I just can't say enough for how I love all, all the help that I've received. And I'm grateful that I can reach out and get this help.
Yeah. And by you sharing, Margot, you're offering help to other people and telling them it's okay for them to get help too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you're brave and you're courageous. We're raised with all those messages that say you must be self-sufficient, right? No one's going to take care of you, or if someone takes care of you, you're weak or you're less than, you know. All of us want to be the ones who help other people. We don't want to be the ones that get helped, you know, but we all need it. And this is where Elijah finds himself in need of help. And theologically speaking, Elijah has ended up in a mindset of only focusing on scarcity. There is no one else who's righteous. It doesn't do any good. I'm all alone. There, is nothing that's worthwhile. And what we see in his story is that God has been there all along, providing for him along the way. Angels fed him and strengthened him for the journey. Ravens came and fed him. God provided not enough for a feast every day, but enough to make it to the next day. And there were miracles. But Elijah, due maybe to the trauma of his experiences or just the ongoing battles or feeling like nothing ever changes, has lost sight of that. And so theologically speaking, what has helped me on my journey is to think in terms of scarcity versus abundance. On the one hand, we have scarcity mindset, and we might say our whole culture, our economy functions on the idea of scarcity, that there's not enough for everyone, so I better get mine. There's not enough out there, so I can only watch out for myself. No one's going to take care of me or help me, so I've got to do it on my own. And what we find theologically in Scripture is that God is a God of abundance. And I'm going to read to you a rather longer quote. And so I apologize for the length of the quote. If you can't take it all in, I'll send it out in the study guide for Jimmy to send out. You can read over it and meditate it. But this is from a Hebrew Bible scholar named Walter Brueggemann, and he actually is a part of the United Church of Christ, same denomination as the Congregational Church of Manhasset. And he's written, I think, very eloquently about how Scripture keeps pointing us to see God as a God of abundance, of offering us what we need in life, providing it for us, and we keep falling into the trap of scarcity, believing there's not enough for everyone, and so I better get mine at whatever cost. And he says the conflict between the narratives of abundance and scarcity is the defining problem confronting us in our time. The gospel story of abundance asserts that we originated in the magnificent, inexplicable love of a God. Whoops, sorry, there's a dog yelping in the background. inexplicable love of God who loved the world into generous being. The baptismal service that a lot of us had when maybe we were infants and don't even remember it, or maybe we had it older when we were old enough to remember it. The baptismal service declares that each one of us has been miraculously loved into existence by God. And the story of abundance says that our lives will end in God, and that this well-being cannot be taken from us. In the words of St. Paul, my favorite verses in the whole Bible, neither life, nor death, nor angels, nor principalities, nor things, nothing can separate us from the love of God. And so what we know about our beginning, that we were created and born in love, and we will die in love of God, then creates a different kind of present tense for us. We can live according to an ethic whereby we are not driven or controlled or anxious or frantic or greedy, precisely because we are sufficiently at home and at peace to care about others as we have been cared for. In other words, we know we began in love because God created us in love. We know we're going to die in love because God is there when we breathe our last. We know how the story began. We know how the story ends. And in the middle, we can live differently, knowing that we are surrounded by God's love, and that God created the earth and called it good and created it how it's meant to work, is that there is enough for everyone. And they're only by our greed and our mindset that believes there's not enough. You know, we're bombarded by messages and commercials that say, you are not enough until you buy this clothes. You're not enough till you buy this car insurance. You're not enough until your house looks this way. You are not enough until you take your vacation where these other people take their vacation. You're not enough till you make enough money. You're not enough. And what we discover, like Elijah, is if that's our scale of being enough, well, we're never enough. It's never enough. We can have all the blessings in the entire world, and if there's always more that needs to be acquired, then when are we ever satisfied? When are we ever at peace? If there's always more to be done in order to be that good person, that successful person, well, then we're never a success. We're never good. We never own enough, have enough, are enough, because there's always more. And what Scripture teaches us is, no, there's enough, and you are enough already as you are, with everything you think is a flaw. You're already enough because God created you, God loves you, God will always be with you, and that's enough. And it's such a mystery. It's such a difficult thing to live into this truth. It's a lifelong journey for me, and I struggle with it because I took in messages growing up that I had to achieve certain things in my life to prove I was a success and of worth. And I didn't believe, and it's taken me a long time to begin to understand and try to believe that I could ever be a good person or be enough or be a success, because it always seemed like there was something new or more I needed to do to prove I was worth anything. And my parents didn't intentionally teach me that. You know, I don't know how I came to believe that, but I did. And learning to trust God and say, right here, right now, I'm going to learn how to be at peace. And I'm going to learn how to live a life where I feel that I matter and that I am a good person, and that the standards I have for success are not real ones that are achievable. Learning that God provides what I need and that's enough, to me, is at the heart of what it means to be alive and appreciating life in the here and now. And so what God tells Elijah is, he says, you're not alone. Remember all those people who believed because of those miracles? Right now, there's 7,000 people I can name to you who still believe and that you've helped to believe. Also, look at how I've provided for you all along the way. Trust that I'm going to keep providing for you in the future. And so what God asked Elijah to do is shift his mindset from a negative mindset of saying everything is worthless, everything is bad, there's never enough of what I need, to an abundance mindset that says, start examining and listing your blessings. And start looking around you and see that there are other people here to support you and you're not alone. The examples that Jean and Margot shared of finding support groups, this is an example of God showing there are other people around you to help you who are just like you and struggling with what you're struggling with. You're not alone. It feels like there's no one, but there's abundance. You're not alone. When we start counting our blessings, we start realizing all the good things we have in our life that really matter, instead of comparing ourselves to standards that we can never meet because we can never hope to keep up with the Joneses or the Smiths or the whoever down the street or on social media. I read something one time long ago about, when you're anxious, something you could do to deal with your anxiety is start literally making a list of everything good that happened that day, starting with, I woke up and I'm alive and I can breathe air and the sun shined and I have a roof over my head and I had food. And you start with the most basic stuff, and literally they've put people in MRI machines and had them do this. And they show the scans of the chemicals in the brain, the different colors changing from the part of your brain, your back brain, that's fight or flight and is used in a crisis, and other parts of your brain begin activating merely by listing the things that you're thankful for, no matter what they are. That literally neurologically were designed by God, that once we begin focusing on what we're thankful for, it literally changes our brain activity. Our neurology literally physiologically changes in our brain. And I once shared that in a sermon, and a lady in my church said, I worry every night when I fall asleep about everything. And she came back to me the next week and she said, every night, like you said, I've started making a list. And she said, I haven't slept this well in decades. And she said, I'm going to keep doing it every day, And so to get at this concept of abundance, I'd like to share with you two stories, because we're right about the time to end. And I'll famous last words that I'll be brief. Okay. One story is by a United Church of Christ minister. Her name is Mary Ludy. And the United Church of Christ has daily email devotions that I highly recommend. And this is from one of her devotions that arrived in my email box that I kept. And she describes getting on a plane, and there's no place in the world that has a greater scarcity mindset than when you're getting on the plane and trying to fit your carry-on luggage in the overhead bin, and people are jostling to get that carry-on luggage in those bins because there's so little space, and people are trading spots for who gets to the window or the aisle, and there's never enough room and that sort of thing. And so she started doing something, and it sounds crazy, or maybe morbid. When she gets on a plane, she thinks to herself, what if these are the people I'm going to die with?
Oh,
What if this plane goes down? And she said, if these are the people I'm going to die with, this is my last moments, would I want to spend it being angry at the person next to me because I feel like he's hogging the armrest? And I thought, well, what a great way to kind of get some perspective and reframe that scarcity mindset to think, what really matters in life? In this moment, it feels like that armrest or that aisle seat or that overhead bin spot matters more than anything in life. But really, it doesn't, you know? And we fill our days with things that and spend so much energy on things that matter so much in the moment, but really don't matter, you know, and no wonder we can't get any peace. And then the final story I want to leave with you came from I don't know if you remember the news in January on I-95 in Virginia, there was an ice storm and all these people were trapped on the interstate overnight due to these wrecks. And the Washington Post has this great feature every weekend called The Inspired Life, where they try to find a positive story, you know, to highlight. And this is a true story about a couple who was trapped on this highway overnight. And all these people were expecting short drives, and they didn't pack food. They didn't pack enough warm clothes. That, you know, they thought they'd just be driving for an hour or two and had no idea they'd be trapped for 30 hours on the interstate because of this ice storm and the wrecks and so forth. And this couple could literally hear people in the other cars around them with children crying for food because there wasn't any food left. And people were walking around asking one another, knocking on car windows saying, you know, do you have any food? My kids don't have enough food to eat, or, you know, I need to take some medication and I need to take it with food and I don't have any food. And right in front of this couple was a truck from a local Washington, D.C. based bakery. Yeah. And it was a bread truck filled with bread. And so they said, why not? They Googled and they called the number of the bread company, the bakery, and left a message saying, hey, we're stuck on I-95 and we're right in front of, behind truck number 1234. Do you think you could get the driver to share the bread? And they left it on a voicemail, having no idea if anybody would answer it. And about 30 minutes later, the owner of the bread company, the bakery, called them back and said, yes, I called the driver and told him to share the bread on that truck with anyone who needs it. And so this couple and the driver opened up the back of the truck and began taking loaves of sliced bread out to all the cars. And they shared it with over 300 cars in that part of the interstate where people were stuck with. And to me, this is one of those miracles of God providing abundance where it seemed like there was scarcity. And all these people who were strangers began coming out and helping and walking carefully over the ice and carrying it to one another's cars to share the bread. And for me, being a minister and a preacher, I immediately thought of communion. I thought of Jesus sharing the bread with a multitude. I thought of the manna in the wilderness. I thought of Elijah being fed by angels and ravens. This is an example. I have no idea if those people were people of faith or if the owner of that bread company is a person of faith, but I look at it as an act of God and a way for us to think about that in those positions where we feel like we have nothing and there is not enough, there is abundance awaiting us if we dare to trust God and to believe that we're not alone. And community was created. Communion was created on that interstate where all these people were stuck together. It could have been a riot where people mobbed the bread truck and broke it open and got food. But instead, it was a moment of people sharing their common humanity together and sharing abundance with one another. And I think when we are in our wilderness moments, one of the ways we grow and find help for our pain and struggle is by looking around us, looking for help, counting our blessings, realizing that our perspective is deeply skewed and deeply focused on scarcity, and that there are blessings and miracles all around us if we change our focus and begin to count them. And that doesn't come easily. It takes practice, it takes help. We have to exercise those spiritual muscles to begin to go against the grain of our culture. But that, to me, is the lesson that Elijah's experience reveals to us. Okay, that wraps up our time, and I'm going to put everything I shared in some more things in the study guide. I'll get that out in the next couple of days for Jimmy to email out to you all. But
Chase,
thank you all. And, oh yeah,
Chase,
please.
Chase,
Yeah.
Can I just ask a question, and not
Sure.
to answer right now, but I'd be very interested in your take. We just did the transfiguration.
Oh,
and
sure.
we were talking about that the two people that were God brought was Moses and Elijah. And it would be very interesting. We're out of time now, but I'd love to understand your thought about why was Elijah selected? I think we could all understand why Moses was selected, but of everybody that was going to be in the transfiguration, why was he selected? Just something to think about.
Yeah, I've got an answer for you, but tune in next week and it will give it to you. And if I launch in next week and forget, interrupt me real quick at the beginning and say, you were supposed to tell us about the transfiguration. Okay, I will. And I even have pictures from my trip to Israel on top of one of the mountains where they think the transfiguration supposedly happened. And I've got pictures of that spot. So if I can figure out how to share it, I'll share it with you next week too.
Great.
So,
Thank
all
you.
right.
Thank you,
Thank
Chase.
you.
We appreciate all this so much. We have been recording. With any luck, we might get the recording out to the congregation this afternoon or tomorrow. So if you know anybody who wasn't able to make it, or you just wanted to share it with someone, you are welcome to do that. So we look forward to seeing you next Wednesday at 12 o'clock right here. And we look forward to seeing Chase, 12 o'clock right here. So thanks for coming,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you.